How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain by Feldman Barrett. This book is considered one of the most important works that changed our understanding of emotions, as Feldman Barrett challenges the prevailing belief that emotions are biologically programmed. Instead, she presents a new theory known as the theory of constructed emotion, which assumes that emotions do not come from specific areas of the brain, but are dynamically constructed through our experiences and neural expectations. In this explanation, I will go through the main chapters of the book in detail, focusing on all the important ideas and scientific stories that Barrett explains. Chapter 1. The Old Myths About Emotions. 1. The traditional idea of emotions. Scientists and philosophers have long believed that emotions such as anger, sadness, joy, and fear are natural reactions programmed within the brain, just like innate instincts. The brain was once thought to have dedicated neural circuits for each type of emotion, such as the amygdala is responsible for fear. The anterior cingulate cortex is responsible for sadness. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for emotional thinking and decision-making. But Barrett shows that these theories are outdated and scientifically inaccurate, and recent studies prove that emotions are not ready-made responses in the brain, but rather the product of complex processes of neural expectations and cognitive processing. 2. Evidence that old hypotheses are wrong. When studying people with damage to the amygdala, they were found not to lose their sense of fear as expected, but rather their behavior changes based on the context. Brain scanning experiments have shown that emotions do not originate from specific areas of the brain, but are distributed across different neural systems that constantly interact with each other. Chapter 2. How does the brain misunderstand emotions? 1. Cultural categories of emotions. Emotions are not as universal as once thought. Facial expressions and emotional reactions vary from culture to culture. Example: in Japan, smiling in some situations is seen as a sign of embarrassment rather than happiness. Some tribes in Africa do not have words for anger in the way we understand it in Western cultures, and have entirely different emotional categories. 2. Language shapes emotions. The more vocabulary a person has to describe their feelings, the more they are able to recognize and control them. People who do not have enough words for their feelings have difficulty expressing themselves, which can lead to psychological problems such as anxiety and depression. Scientific experiment. In one study, people from different cultures were shown facial expressions, and researchers found that their interpretation of these expressions depended on their cultural and linguistic experiences, not on the facial expression itself. Chapter 3. How does the brain build emotions? 1. Emotions are not direct reactions. They are expectations. The brain works in a way of anticipatory expectations. When you encounter a certain situation, your brain does not simply respond, but rather anticipates the emotion based on its previous experiences. For example, when you see a person's face with an ambiguous expression, your brain does not interpret the emotion directly, but rather relies on the context of the previous experience to predict whether this person is happy, angry, or neutral. 2. The importance of the body in shaping emotions. Emotions are not just mental processes, but depend largely on the physical state. For example, feeling stressed may be the result of a disturbance in the body's internal system and not necessarily due to an external situation. Chapter 4. How does language affect emotions? Language is not just a tool for communication. It is a major means of shaping emotions. When we learn words for new emotions, we can feel them more clearly. For example, people who do not have a word for complex emotions find it difficult to recognize them within themselves. Scientific experiment. In one study, people with a rich emotional vocabulary were found to be better able to control their emotions than those with a limited vocabulary. Chapter 5. How does culture influence the formation of emotions? Some cultures encourage the display of emotions such as anger or happiness, while others suppress them. In some societies, sadness is seen as a sign of strength, while in others, it is seen as weakness. Scientific experiment. When people from different cultures were shown facial expressions, their interpretations of those expressions differed based on their cultural experiences. Chapter 6. Emotions and Mental Health. Chronic anxiety is the result of false expectations that the brain constantly makes about the environment. We can train our minds to reshape emotions by changing our expectations and cognitive context. Conclusion. If you can understand how your brain creates emotions, you can retrain your brain to react in a healthier way to emotional situations. Chapter 7. How can we control our emotions? 1. Practice mindfulness. Observe emotions instead of getting caught up in them. Recognize that emotions are not inevitable, but can be shaped. 2. Expand your emotional vocabulary. The more you can describe your emotions, the more you can control them. 3. Reframing situations. Changing the way you interpret situations can change your emotional response. For example, instead of seeing an embarrassing situation as a failure, you can see it as an opportunity to learn. Kohler's key lessons learned from the book. 1. Emotions are not innate, but are constructed through experiences and expectations. 2. Language and culture play a major role in shaping our emotions. 3. We can control our emotions by changing our environment, our cognitive context, and our expectations. 4. Improving self-awareness and meditation can help us manage emotions in a healthier way. Tosin.